Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this double cabochon wirework pendant. So it's going to be quite a long one because I'm going to be taking you through the whole process from start to finish, right from the initial sketch all the way to the very end. And I wanted to make it as detailed as possible. Now I made these into a double cabochon pendant, but you could also use either of these designs completely on their own. So what I'm going to do is put timestamps in the description box down below the video. So if you just prefer one of them and just want to make that, you can easily find it without having to sit through the whole video. But anyway, enough talking. If you want to learn how to make this pendant, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. Now I have two different gauges of regular round silver coated copper wire here. So first I have a 0.8mm, this is going to be the base wire. And then here I have a 0.4mm, which is the weaving wire. And then of course we'll need the cabochons that we want to capture. So I'm using an oval and a teardrop shape in this case. Obviously you can customize this design for other shapes and sizes, so it doesn't have to be these specific measurements and shapes. But the oval one here is 4 by 2.5 centimeters, and also this teardrop shape one is 4 by 2.5 centimeters as well. But like I said, you can use other sizes and shapes. I'm just going to show you the technique and you can customize it to the cabochons that you're using. And then of course we also need some findings here for when we've captured the cabochons. So I've got my chain that I'm going to use to hang the cabochons from, and then I've got my findings, so loft or claw clasp extended chain, and of course some jump rings. So I'm going to leave the material list and links you might need in the description box down below the video. Otherwise, let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So to start out with, for a design like this, I like to kind of plan it out a little bit, which for me means kind of doing a bit of a sketch. So first of all, I start with taking my cabochons and then I'm laying them out how I want them to end up sitting, or hanging rather. And then I just want to basically trace around them with a pencil just to get the shape in there. So I just do that for both of them. Just so it's as precise as possible. So I've got the oval one laying sideways here, and then I've got the teardrop one below it with the point facing downwards. Because that's how I want them to end up sitting or hanging. And this is then the beginning of the sketch. So I can now take it from here and start. First of all, if you kind of obviously coming up with the design, start making the sketch here to kind of visualize it a bit more. And I find that really helps. And otherwise also to plot in certain points where you want certain things to be. So for instance, some loops or connection point or something like that. It really helps when you then go to make the piece to be able to reference back to this and kind of use it as a little bit of a template as well. So I know that on the bottom here, the tip of the teardrop shape, you could say, is going to be wrapped. And then I need to come further up the side or sides, and this is also going to be wrapped. And I'm kind of just doing this to, like I said, have a bit of a gauge for when I start wrapping. I can use it a little bit as measurement as well, so it's not just kind of doing it by eye. It's something a little bit like this. And then I do want my loops to kind of hold the front of the cabochon as well, to be from here so I start with a smaller one and then I do a larger one, and then I finish with the smaller one again. And obviously you can refine this, and the same with the other side, as symmetrical as possible. So the smaller one, the larger loop, and then back to a smaller one. Now, as part of the design and part of holding the cabochon from the front, some of these wires are going to come in across a little bit as well. It's not too crucial to put that in the sketch, but I'm kind of just doing it just to give you a bit of a visual of what the purpose is going to be. So just roughly something a bit like that. It's more to have an idea. And then to me, one of the most important things here is to find out where, if you can call it, the connection point is going to be, because I need to add some loops to the top here. So something a bit like this. But then I need to be able to match it up with the loops on the cabochon on the top. So I need to make sure when I make them, then obviously that, say the two loops on the top cabochon there aren't off from the bottom one. So say if they're really close and these are far apart, then they aren't going to line up and be able to fit together. So obviously that is kind of one of the most important things. And I'm going to have the loops on one facing one way, and obviously the loops on the other one facing the other way, to be able to link them together. So just something a bit like that for reference. And then again, moving on to the top one, I want to have, it's going to be wrapped further around as well, same as there's going to be more wraps on the bottom one, but if I do roughly from the sides to begin with, that's a reference. And then I want the equivalent loops that I have here, I want them up here as well, but I'm going to make them kind of go below. So I do again start with the small one and then make it go to the larger one and then a small one again. And like before, these aren't too crucial to get precise, it's more just for reference, so I kind of know what my plan is. Small one, larger one, and a small one. And these loops that we're making here and on the other one is also going to help capture the cabochon from the front. So it's not obviously going to be able to come out there. Same as these wires are going to come in across the front. And then I am also going to have wires coming across the front up here on the top one. And again, that's really just for reference. Doesn't have to be too precise in the sketch, because that is something we can always kind of fiddle around with. Once we've done the rest, kind of we end up with these side points, and then that's when you would start working on them anyway. But what I do just want to add as well, final thing more or less, is we need some loops here at the top, just like down here, but we need these ones here to be able to add our chain to. So using jump rings or something like that. So obviously we need to make sure we don't forget about them. And then I just know roughly where I want them. So I can kind of see from this that the measurement is a little bit off. It's not too important, but if it's too obvious here, I like to kind of just correct it on my sketch. So I just need to move this out a little bit further. Just something a bit more like this. But anyway, this is then the basic sketch. I have my points where I know I need to capture as part of the cabochon here from the front. Obviously the back will look different, but we're not going to be working on that till after we've done all this anyway. So this is the beginning part we're going to do. And then, as most importantly, I have the points where I'm going to be wanting to add in loops, and just to make sure as well that I don't forget about them, and also that the distancing is nice and correct as far as possible. So this is our starting point. So I will keep referencing back to this whenever I need to. So I'm going to kind of use this as a bit of a template, like I said. So also we need to obviously figure out how long we need our wires to be. That will depend completely on the materials that you're using. And it doesn't have to be perfect anyway. I always say rather have too much wire than too little, because obviously if you have too little, that's going to be a problem, whereas too much, you just cut off the excess. So just to get a rough idea, just take my, because I'm going to start with doing the teardrop shape here, and just take a scrap piece of wire, and I'm just going to get a rough circumference, something a bit like that. And I then kind of like to make sure that I at least double this and add a bit extra as well. So that's why it's hard for me to really give precise measurement, because obviously you might use some different cabochons or something like that, but that's kind of what I like to do. So I'm kind of at least doubling the circumference of the stone, the cabochon, and then adding a bit extra as well, because like I said, I'd rather have too much than too little. So I've ended up cutting 4 lengths of a 0.8mm here of about 30 centimeters each, but like I said, that's just the lengths that I'm using here for my cabochons. I've then also cut a short length here of a 0.4mm, maybe about 15 to 20 centimeters or so. It's just a short length enough to literally do the tip of the cabochon to begin with, and this is just going to be used to basically hold these 4 wires together. So I grab my 4 lengths of base wire here, and I also make sure that they don't have any kinks or bends in them, so straighten them out nicely. They don't have to be 100% perfect stick straight, but just so there's no obvious kinks or bends or too large curves in it. So something like this, and then I find the midpoint, so you can just measure that, obviously halfway in from either end. Then I take this short length of 0.4mm. So like I said, I'm going to use this to basically wrap around the base wires just to hold them together. So I'll make sure the base wires are laying flat next to each other, and they need to stay like that. Then I just start wrapping this wire around it, and as I'm kind of doing one wrap at a time here, I like to also have my chain nose or flat nose pliers handy and kind of flatten it down as I go and tighten it around the wires. And then I do my next wrap, making sure that that wrap is right next to the other one so we don't have any overlap or anything. And bring that down behind. So I'm basically just coiling this weaving wire around the base wires and also squeezing them together there, so they stay nice and close to each other. So you can kind of see the difference between once I've used my pliers and flattened them down to when I've just wrapped it around that last one. It makes it grip on tighter to the base wires as well and push them together. And I'm just going to be doing about 5 of these wraps here, so I think that was the 4th one. And then the last one. Squeeze that down using the pliers. Also makes it look nice and neat. And again, making sure that these wraps are nice and flat, sitting next to each other. We don't have any overlap. Now what you'll find, you can still probably move this up and down the wires. So if say it's moved a little bit, you can double check now that this is still in the middle of the base wires. Otherwise you can just move it to that point. So you can see we didn't need a whole lot of the 0.4mm wire for this. Now what I'm going to do is get rid of the excess. So I'm going to do that on the back because we don't want the ends to be sticking out and away from the piece, because that's going to kind of be out in the open where it can catch and scratch on things. So here on the same side, which is going to end up being the back, what's going to be towards the cabochon, I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess, and I'm cutting it so I have the end of the wire there still kind of going across those base wires, but then being finished off in the middle of them. The same with the one on the other side. So I don't want to cut it off right where it's coming around from the other side. Get rid of that. And then I'm just going to take my chain nose here and push it down. And then if you can really try and squeeze that end kind of into the base wires to basically tuck it away. Keep it nice and tight. And then we have our little, you could call it connection point here, where we connected all these 4 wires together now and hold them together with this little wrap. So I'm then going to take my wires here and also some chain nose or flat nose pliers. Just make sure that if you're using flat nose pliers that they aren't larger than the wrapped section there. Then I'm just going to basically place my pliers on that wrapped section, making sure that it's still in the middle, and then I'm just going to start bending these base wires into the shape that they're going to more be, because we then need to start wrapping them around the cabochon, and this is kind of just to help them along the way. And make sure as well that the back of this wrap section is on the inside here, because like I said, that's going to then end up sitting up against the cabochon. So I'm just going to swap to my chain nose pliers because they're a bit finer. Because we do got to remember this is the point of the cabochon. So something a little bit like this. Now obviously it will help to just reference back. You can take the cabochon here and kind of just lay that in there to see how it will sit. So if the bend that we're making basically ends up fitting nicely with the point of the cabochon. So something like that. We don't need to bend these further in. They're going to be coming up the sides here like this, moving towards the top part, so that curved part of the top. So this is looking pretty good for now. You can see the shape of the cabochon here with the point in that little kind of corner we created is sitting nicely, and the wires are coming up the sides. So what I then like to do is kind of lay it down on a flat surface here, make sure that point is sitting where we want it to, and then the wires are obviously naturally coming up the sides, but you can start to just bring them around the side a little bit, the curved side. Not all the way just yet, but just a little bit in here. And the same on the other side. Make sure to hold everything in place. And still have the wires sitting flat next to each other. So just something a bit like this for now. Now it's not perfect yet, obviously, we still got some work to do here. But what I then just want to do now is cut 2 lengths of a 0.4mm wire here, of about 30 centimeters or so. So I've cut them ready because I want to be able to just grab it when I need it, rather than kind of be fiddling about with this and then I need to put it down to be able to cut my wires. So these 2 lengths are ready for me. Now if I then just bring in my sketch again to see where we got to, we can see that we're making it up the sides here, and I'm basically getting to the point where I then want to do the wraps on the sides to again hold the base wires together. Same principle to begin with as down here, but then also after that we need to start making these little loops. So first of all we need to connect the base wires. So that means I'm just going to grab one of those 0.4mm lengths that I cut ready, and then of course the wires themselves. So as you can see, we're now just going to work on one side at a time, and this is basically the same principle as at the point there. So I'm putting my length behind the wires, making sure they're still laying flat next to each other all the way so we don't have any of them crossing over. And then I'm just going to start wrapping this around Still keep the base wires flat next to each other, and as you're wrapping, use your chain nose or flat nose to go in and flatten it against the base wires, kind of make it grip better. And then we just want to do a few wraps here. And squeeze down. So I've done 4 wraps here, and then you can see this can still move up and down the base wires, so don't worry too much about positioning just yet. Just kind of leave it there for now. For now it's more just to hold the base wires together. I'm going to turn my piece around, grab the other length of 0.4mm wire that I cut ready. The other one I'm just leaving there to kind of hang out. And then again, making sure the base wires are flat next to each other. Then we just want to do the exact same thing here. So wrap the weaving wire around. To basically hold the base wires together. Give it a bit of a connection point there. And then do the same amount of wraps on this side. So then I'm just going to reference back to my sketch again here, because I now need to make sure that I get these little wrap sections that I just made in the right position. So I don't want them to be too high up, the wires, and also not too far down. So I kind of like to just reference the sketch to see what it was I had in mind then when I was kind of making that. So again, just do one side at a time. I'm going to position it. Actually, push it down just a little bit. So around there. And then I'm going to hold on to that with my fingers. And then with that section being there, we then need to start making these loops as well, because these loops then also going to help. Obviously, that means this wrap section won't be able to go further up. So that means I'm only going to be using the very top wire to make the loops. So I'm separating that one out, and then I'm just going to hold my wire pretty much further out from in here where the loop is going to be made, because it kind of gives you a better curve, I find. And then I'm going to bring it around itself. Just get that tail out of the way. And then start making it into that loop shape. And then obviously we need to adjust the size. So the very first loop is going to be a smaller one, and you can keep referencing here to make sure nothing is moving at any point. It stays where you want it to. And then just keep making this smaller and getting it into position. So I just want to get this a bit smaller still. Just maneuvering it. And then just smooth this wire out. So I think something a little bit like this, maybe just a little bit smaller. Just so, obviously the next one is going to be the larger one. Don't want to feel like I have to make that larger than I want to. And there we go. So I'm just going to use the first loop there for reference now to make the next one. So I'm just going to make all 3 loops here at the same time, or one at a time obviously, but before we start the next step. So same principle, bring it over the top of itself and start bringing it around, and then just maneuver and adjust the shape and the size until you're happy. And obviously I want this to sit next to the other one. And make sure the wire comes back up the same way that it was coming before we started making the loop. So something a bit like that. I think I also don't want them to be too large so they kind of overlap too much of the stone, but obviously that's completely personal preference. And then for the third one, same again, And remember, this is then also a small one. So I now want to try and make this as similar to the first one as possible, to make it as symmetrical as possible, you could say. So make the loop, and then I'm going to get it smaller and smaller and in the right position. I'm smoothing out my wire along the way. If you need to readjust anything, you can also use pliers to help maneuver your loops and your wires. Just comparing them. Almost there, I think just a little bit smaller still. Something a bit like that. And then I just want to make sure how they're sitting in comparison to each other. So I don't want, for instance, the distance between two to be further than the distance between the other two. So I do think this is looking pretty alright. And then bring this wire back up again. So basically it's going to end up the wire going back up and laying in the same place where we took it from. We've just now then added in these loops along the way. And they're going to be sitting and overlapping over the front of the stone, which is going to help hold it in place. Now that's this side here. As you can see, now this is moved down, but once we made that first loop, that doesn't matter, because now we can push that up and we know that's where that's going to sit, because obviously it can't go any further. So that's how you make the loops here. Get them in the right place. Just smooth the wire pack out to follow back with the other ones. Going to flip it around. Just measure here my sketch. I want to bring it down, and obviously I then also want to make sure it's pretty even as much as possible with the other side, so it's about the same distance up that side. Grab onto that, and then you separate out the top base wire on this side, and you start doing your loops in the same way, obviously working on the opposite side here. And then again, try and make sure to get these loops as similar to the ones on the other side as possible. So now I made the loops on both sides here, you can see as even as possible. Then I want to start securing it in place as well. So that's what I'm going to continue now, using these lengths of 0.4mm wire. Again, I'm just starting one side at a time. So first of all, just starting this side here, I want to make sure that the wraps that I already did on this side are pushed as far up as they'll go to sit right underneath that first loop, which is a small one. Then what I'm going to do to start securing is I'm going to keep doing the same thing, wrapping around, but what you can see right now is we've kind of reached where we're right below that first loop, so we can't wrap around all 4 wires in the same way. So I'm just going to wrap around the bottom 3. So basically come in underneath the loop. You can use your pliers to help push any wire into place. And then we just want to go like this underneath the loop, only wrapping around the 3 wires until we get to the other side of the loop. Again, I'm still wanting to squeeze them down flat and also push them as tight together as possible. Making my way underneath the loop. Squeezing it down. And then I just want to see where I am, if I've gone far enough yet to where we can start wrapping that top wire with it as well again. So that's when we get right after the loop and we have this little section of wire between the loops that we can actually wrap over the top of them, which I feel like I think I'll just do one more wrap around just the 3 wires. Like that. And then I should be able to go over the top of all 4 again. And now when I'm wrapping this, I'm making sure that the wire comes down between the 2 first loops. And still all my base wires there laying flat. next to each other. And now basically I'm just gonna wrap until I then reach the point where that large loop, the middle one, I'm gonna be underneath that. So again, I don't have any more of the top wire that I can wrap because I'm below the loop. So we're basically just going across and then catching that top wire where we can. And when you reach below that large loop, the middle one, just go back to wrapping only the bottom 3 wires there. Again, until we make it to the other side of the loop, and we can then start wrapping the wire that's in between the last 2 loops. And just keep doing that until you reach the other end, or the other side there of that final loop. So now I reach the other side of that final loop there, where if I was going to continue wrapping, I can start wrapping, including that top wire that I made the loops with. I'm not going to be doing that though. I'm going to stop here. You can do that if you want to, just to connect that last wire, the top wire after that last loop there. That's up to you. Just do a couple. But otherwise, I'm going to flip my piece around and basically go to the other side and just repeat the same thing. So push your existing wraps as far up as possible, and then we just continue wrapping here, and straight away I'm going to go below the first loop, and same principle, just keep capturing that top wire in between the loops. So now that both sides are done here, what we can do is, because we're done using the weaving wires, is go in and cut off the excess. And that's the same principle as when we did the tip. Just make sure the ends are being finished on the inside, so they're going to be against the cabochon, and cut them off about the middle of the base wires, and then flatten them down. Same with the other one. That way again, the ends are not going to be catching or scratching on anything, whether it's clothes or skin. And just make sure to squeeze that down as well. So there we go, and of course do the same with the other one. And then if you can imagine here, get the cabochon to show you how it's going to be. And obviously we can also do this just to check that everything is as we want. It's going to sit in the shape of the cabochon, obviously, and then these loops are just coming in over the sides to gently help capture the cabochon, but at the same time not covering it too much, kind of just adding a bit of extra nice design. Now we need to continue shaping these ends of our base wires. So again, I just like to lay it down on a flat surface here, so I can kind of keep control over it. So I make sure that the frame that we're making sits nicely and tightly around the cabochon. And then I'm just going to grab one set of wires at a time here, one group at a time, all of them at the same time in the group, and then just keep them coming around the top of the cabochon there, just so they get that shape in them. And they obviously overlap up here for now, but then we have that rounded shape at the top, and then you can see the whole frame is sitting nice and tightly around the cabochon. Now obviously the top here is still open, which is then what we're going to deal with next. Now I'm going to be doing this with the cabochon in place, so I'm going to hold it like this with my fingers. It can be a little bit fiddly because obviously it's not actually in there securely, so it easily will fall out. So that's why I'm just holding it the best I can in the frame, make sure it's sitting how I want it to. And then I'm going to take one group at a time and start shaping that. Now what I want is for the groups, both of them, to end up kind of at the top here, swooping with a curve, and then actually starting to come down on the back of the cabochon. So hold it in place best you can, and then I take that one group at a time, working with all 4 lengths, and then I just start to bring them around to the back a bit like that here, so it's not actually going in on the middle of the top there, because when I then do the other one, do the same thing, but obviously it's mirrored, it's on the other side. It's going to come down as well, but then sit next to, for now, the first group. Now it's still not perfect, but don't worry about that. We're doing this gradually, but then you can see the principle is that they're going to end up not overlapping there at the top, but only kind of curving in towards each other and then coming down towards the back here. So just grab that and bring it further around. So just like this for now. And then what we are going to end up doing, probably see the principle, is use some of these wires to also help secure the back of it. So then what I'm going to do before I start securing any of these wires on the back, I want to just separate out 2 of the wires here. So we want to make sure we choose the right ones. I basically want to choose the second one from the back. So in this case, on this side here, it's this one. I'm just going to separate out from the others and then just kind of bring it up and out of the way for now. And then on the other side, just picking out the correct one. I think it's this one here. Again, just bring that up and out of the way, because these 2 I'm going to use to create the loops with, that we can then attach this cabochon to the other one. So I'm just going to leave them up and out of the way, and the other wires are then coming down here behind the back of the cabochon. And now what we need to do is start crossing these over and under each other. So I kind of want a crossover pattern between them. Obviously you can kind of do this however you want to. You can make this different, that's completely up to you. But what I'm going to do is start from the left, doesn't matter what side you start from. But try and hold things in place in the shape here. Obviously it's still loose because it's open at the top. Just do your best. And just, you can pull it down a little bit. So the bottom one on this side, I pull over to the other side, underneath the wires here. Then I take the bottom one on this side and pull over to the other side here as well. So these 2 are crossing over each other now, and I'm just going to then pull them down a little bit. And we can also do this without the stone in the whole time. And smooth them out on the way as well. And then just make sure pick out the correct one on the other side again. Pull that down here. So we still have curves in there, but they are then crossing in the middle there. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect just yet, because then we can still do adjustments, but just get it a little bit into position for now. Just need to smooth this one out a little bit more. So they're crossing a bit further down here towards the bottom. Then I take, because I started on the right side, so that's the next one I want to take again. So that, make sure you take the next one in. So the next one in line. Now obviously the next one in line technically is the one we brought up and out of the way, but just kind of ignore that. The next one is the other long one, because the last ones here are shorter because they're the ones we used for the loops, so they have a little bit shorter length left. But this I then also bring down a bit, but then over towards the opposite side. So you can slowly start to see we took from the right side first, over, and then, oh, from the left side, sorry. So we took from left, and then we took right, and then left. And then, probably guessed it, we're going to take the right again. So we're basically alternating from side to side. So we get that crossover effect in the middle. And then the final ones, just kind of want to bring them over without moving them too much, because I want to make sure I'm not disturbing anything shape-wise when I put my cabochon back in. I want it to sit, so I'm still happy with it, because these top wires, I do want them to come, if we look from the front, kind of curving in over the top there, so they do still just catch it at the top, but also it adds just a nice look to them, or to it rather. So they kind of just come in and hug the cabochon over that top curved side. So we have now crossed over all the wires here. So then take a bit of time maneuvering your wires around until you're happy with how they're positioned. So I'm just taking 2 wires at a time. I'm not doing all of them at the same time, because that's a little bit overwhelming and difficult, because like I said, the top is still open. So I'm just starting with the bottom 2 here, the ones that are crossing over at the very bottom, and kind of just don't worry about the other ones right now. So I've got those bottom 2 into position how I like them to sit. Then what we need to do is cut off the excess length, because I then need to make little loops at the very ends, so we can then connect these wires to the actual outer frame there on the side. So I'm going to take my flush cutters here and rather cut off too little than too much, because you can always gradually cut off more, whereas obviously we can't add more. So I'm going to cut off so I have a length about like that, coming away from the frame, and then about the same on the other side. Like I said, doesn't have to be perfect yet. I then take my 6-step bell making pliers here, because I like to use the same step, so I know that each of these loops that I'm going to be making get the exact same size, and I'm just using the very smallest step, but you can easily use round nose pliers as well. Then what I'm going to do is, this might be a little bit easier to do without the cabochon in place. You can already see there that it was captured quite a bit better. Had to do a bit more work to actually get it out, because the wires are starting to cross over on the back here. But anyway, I then start one at a time, grab the very end of the wire that I cut off, and then start to bring it in on itself all the way to create that loop. Now I can already see here this is a little bit too far out, so I didn't cut off quite enough, but like I said, rather that, before I adjust anything on that, I'm just gonna create the loop on the other side as well. Just making sure I'm using that same step, and then doing the loop, making sure I bring the very end all the way around so I get a full circle. So again, you can see that overlaps a little bit, so not quite ready. So that means I'm going to go in, take my flush cutters there and cut off at the very tip of the wire, just a little bit at a time. So you can see I cut off a bit there. Then I take the 6-step bell making pliers again and basically continue the roll, and I just keep doing that until it basically then ends up fitting perfectly, meeting up with the outer frame there. Obviously the same on the other side, and also so they're nice and even. So just cut off a little bit at a time and then keep rolling it until they fit nicely. And then of course you continue with the other wires, so get them in position, cut off the excess, leaving a short end there. Again, rather too much than too little. And then go in and start making your little circle or loop. And I like to make sure that I do these in the same direction, so they're all kind of going up and around instead of maybe one is going that way and then one is going the opposite way, but that's just personal preference. Obviously it all depends how you want yours to look. And then again, just need to cut that down a little bit more, but otherwise I'm going to do the other side as well, get them to sit properly. And then of course I need to do the final two as well, making sure that everything still fits and sits nicely with the cabochon in place. So you can keep taking it in and out. Obviously it might be a little bit easier to do some things with it out because it isn't securely in there just yet, but then just keep putting it back in to make sure everything is still sitting nicely. So now I got the back ready here. I sorted out all the lengths and I prepared them with those little loops so they fit nicely. And obviously we can still adjust it as we're going to be putting it together, but for now I'm pretty happy with it. So what I'm just going to do before I actually attach them is just deal with these two wires as well, because like I said, these are the ones I'm going to use to make the loops with at the top here, so we can connect this cabochon to the other one. So I get my sketching again just to reference roughly where it was that I want those loops to be. So can lay this down. We can kind of use that to judge. So what we're going to need to do is take some chain nose pliers here, make sure it's sitting nicely. So the frame, even though it's not fully attached yet there at the top, I'm holding it in place, the frame around the cabochon. Then I'm going to need to bring these wires here. Just have a look. So roughly around there. I'm going to grab the place where I want the bend to be with my pliers and then make a bend straight upwards. So something a bit like that. And then of course the same with the other side. Now we want it to be as symmetrical as possible. So just bring it down a little bit before putting your pliers and then putting that bend in. Bringing it a little bit further out. And then just obviously smooth out these wires here. So they're coming straight up and away from the piece. So I'm happy with how it looks from the front. So how symmetrical that they are sitting, obviously. That's the most important thing with these loops there. Then I just want to push them forward a little bit because right now they're pretty far back. So push them forward a bit here. A bit like that. Then again I take my 6-step bail making pliers and I place them just one at a time, and then I go in and bring the wire around, and it's a little bit high up now. I want this loop to come all the way down where the bend is, so it's not sticking up too much. Just going to bring this around the pliers so it's a full circle, and then I can just roll it down into place. So a little bit more actually. Something a bit like that. Now it's up to you as well, obviously, how far down you want it to be. That will then also determine the distance between the cabochons once they're both made and then put together. The other one also, bring that all the way around. So we can then also go in and roll that down to sit where we want it. And then obviously making sure they are both level with each other. So we're creating these little loops here. To then be the ones that connect with the other cabochon. I then take my flush cutters here because we then need to obviously get rid of the excess wire. So I go in right where the wire meets up with the salt, so it creates that full circle, and cut off the excess. Again, same principle as before, rather cut off too little than too much, because can always go in and cut off a little bit more if we need to. But then if it's good, then you can flatten it down, and it basically creates a little loop like that, where the very end of the wire is kind of butting up against itself like this. So the very end here against the side of itself further down. Same thing on the other end, other side. Go in and cut off the excess. I'm just gonna find the right place. So that can also create that loop. And then basically these almost work as jump rings because they are actually, so you can then open and close them. Now obviously you could also just use jump rings, but I kind of like attaching these two cabochons together without jump rings, just have it be the actual two cabochons and obviously the frames. But these can now open and close as a jump ring. So all that's left to do now here with this one is attach these loose ends to the back of the frame. So for that we'll need a short length again of our 0.4mm wire here. And then it's no specific length really, just a short length to work with. Then we'll just start in one place, it doesn't really matter where. And we need to attach these loops to the back of the frame. And it's going to be to the very back wire, because we have the 4 wires, because the front ones are going to be going across the front of the cabochon. So the back one is going to be left basically alone, you could say. So I'm just going to go into one place here. I'm just going to start with the bottom one, and then you can just separate out that back wire a little bit, just enough to be able to get the wire through here, the 0.4mm wire. But first of all, we need to attach our wire. So just get that through. In between those two base wires. So you can just start working here towards one end. Now you just want to wrap this around that base wire a few times to basically attach it. You can start this without the cabochon in it, of course. Just remember to put it in before you kind of seal it, and then you won't be able to get it in. And then I just want to make sure that these wraps here become nice and tight. You just want to do a few of these wraps sitting next to each other, or coils you could say. And then what you want to do is go in, you can see I'm working down here towards where that first loop is. You want to then go in and take the other end here and actually just catch onto that loop. So that's also why I made them little loops, because that means we can then use them to go through here with the 0.4mm when we're connecting them. So like this, and we have something to securely go through. And then I wrap my 0.4mm wire here around the wire in the loop a few times. Same principle to make it secure. So a bit like this. And then I want to go back to the wire in the frame again. So I'm kind of wrapping this in a figure of 8 weave as well, between the loop and the frame wire, as I'm going from one to the other. So we're now back under the frame wire, so I can again wrap a few times around that, just like I did when I attached it, because you always have to make sure when you want to finish off a wire that you wrap it around, ideally a single base wire, a few times by itself, which we did when we attached it. And then I'm also doing now, as I want to finish it off so we can get ready to cut off the excess wire. And to do that, I take my flush cutters here, so I just do one at a time. This one is coming from kind of behind the wrap, so I just want to bring it around as if it was wrapping again, but it isn't. I'm just going to go in and cut off the excess. And then just that very end, tuck it in, so that basically gets tucked in between the base wires. And obviously again, so that end isn't going to catch or scratch on anything. And here, it's wrapping the opposite direction. So cut off the excess, leaving a short tail, to then be able to tuck that in. And that then gets hidden away, technically in between this base wire on the frame and the cabochon itself. So just tuck that away, and now that loop there is nicely and securely attached. And of course, all that's left to do is, if you've got more left of that length, go in, repeat with the rest of them, and then the cabochon will be nicely secured from the back. So now I've finished the back, and this is what it looks like. And then the cabochon is in there more or less securely, but we can just do some final adjustments because you just want to check that obviously it is completely secure. So first of all, at the top here, if you find that these wires have moved too far out, you maybe can just push them in over a little bit, so obviously it can't slip out of the top. But also what I just want to do is, at the bottom here, I'm going to use these wires that are on the frame and just bring them in over the cabochon slightly. So just take one wire at a time there and put your nail down in between and just start pushing it in over. And then it's really up to you how you want that to look, how far in you want to kind of push it. And then you can do the next one as well, so you kind of separate them from each other, which also adds a nice design feature. Of course, the same on the other side to make them even. And then the next one. And then just see how they look. Need to adjust anything. So just something a little bit like that. So that is enough to literally just grab over the edge of the cabochon on both sides. So that is all that's left. Just do any final adjustments like that, and then this cabochon, or this part of it, is complete. So now we made the first cabochon here, it is time to bring in the other one. So obviously capture that, but also make it so they end up being able to get connected. So if we just bring in the sketch again, you can see how it's going to sit. Like I say, keep referring back to it. We've done the bottom one, now it's time to do the top one. So it's basically going to be a lot of the same principles, but we do have to just start a little bit differently. Obviously the shape is different, but like I said, this technique can be used for different shapes and sizes, so it's not specific to having to use these ones here. So as you can see, we don't start with a point like we did with this teardrop shape, so that's a little bit different, but also we actually need to do connection points here on the bottom side as well. So let's get cracking with that. So we then need another 4 lengths of our 0.8mm here to capture this second cabochon, and I'm just using the same length as the cabochons are very similar in size. And then we also need another length of a 0.4mm wire here, and this is about 1 meter and 25 centimeters. So firstly we need to grab our base wires here, and I'm just going to pick out one of them. So just grab one length, put the other ones aside for now, out of the way, and then we need to start making the loops that are going to connect to the cabochon we already made, so they need to fit into these loops here. So we need to make these loops at the midpoint of this wire, so we have about the same length left on either side. So again, I'm going to use my 6mm making pliers to do that, using that smaller step. And then place your pliers on the wire, roughly about the midpoint, but a bit to the side. And then start bringing your wire around the pliers. So we end up with a full circle like that. And just smooth out the wires as you're going. Now you can also just flatten this down to make sure it's laying flat on top of itself. Now we then need to make the next loop, and just double check which side might be the longest. So for me, that's this side here to the right of it. So that means I need to place my pliers on that side of the first loop. Now here it's a matter of judging obviously where this loop needs to be. So that's where you can place your pliers where you think it might be, then grab your first cabochon that you made, and then basically place it where the first loop is that you already made, and then obviously see how it's going to fit with where your pliers are sitting. And that looks like it might not be too bad. So that's going to fit pretty nicely. Then we need to make the next loop, and again you just take that long tail on the other side and bring it around the pliers. So we end up getting a full circle again. Again, just smooth out your wire whenever you need to. So again, both ends of the wire are still coming out in the same direction as they were when it was just a straight piece, but we just added the loops in basically along the way. And smoothing that out there. And then we have the two loops. Now obviously we can just double check this. So bring that first cabochon in again and see how they're going to slot into each other, because you can just adjust this a little bit. I actually feel like I need to actually move them a little bit further apart for it to be completely perfect. So to do that, place your pliers, 6mm making pliers here, back in the loop, and then we kind of basically want to roll the loop along the wire, just a tiny little bit at a time. So in this case I want to move this loop a little bit away from the first one, so I'm going to roll it in this direction. So I kind of put my finger against the wire and just start rolling it a little bit. Now obviously this wire is going to move with it, but you just literally press that back to get it straight out. So you can easily make slight adjustments like this if you just need to adjust the distance between them until we get it just right. So it's going to sit just nicely, something a bit like that. So now that we have the wire with the two loops ready here, we're happy with the distance between them. We then need to bring in the other base wires again. So we need to basically line these up, and we just need to do it in order because this is going to be, you could say, sandwiched between some of the other wires. Now what we're going to have is start with one of our straight wires, then I'm going to take this wire with the loops, lay next to it, and then they're going to lay next to each other, so basically the loops are going to be kind of sticking out and away from them like that. So just hold on to your wires here. Then I'm going to take the remaining two and place them after the wire with the loops. So they're going to lay flat next to each other like this. And on this side, there's no loop sticking out, but on the other side is where the loops are sticking out. And then we need to start attaching these together. So just make sure that that wire with the loop stays in the right position. Now, because obviously all these wires are loose, yep, it could be a little bit fiddly to hold on to, but this is where our 0.4mm wire then comes into play. So first of all, we need to find the middle of this. So I'm going to get to the end, on both ends rather, of this 0.4mm. And then that will give us the midpoint here, because I'm going to start wrapping this now around, and that's also going to obviously be the midpoint of the base wires. So just hold on to the base wires. We have the weaving wire here. Just double checking, making sure that that wire with the loops is staying in the right position. So I have one wire on one side and two wires on the other side of the wires without loops. Now all we're going to do is wrap this wire around all of the base wires. So I have it placed behind the base wires, and I'm kind of holding on to that with my finger. Then going to place it over the top of all of them to have it then come back down behind again. Now this is where I also find it really helpful to use pliers while doing this, to help, one, you maneuver the wire, but also flatten the wire, the weaving wire here against the base wires, because we want to get this as neat as possible. And then wrap again, making sure it's next to the previous wrap, something like that. And again, and flatten that down against the base wires, and also help push them together. Now as you can see, this is moving up and down there on the base wires, so don't worry about that, because obviously first of all, it won't go any further than those loops. But we'll keep wrapping like this, and it's going to get more and more solid. Push them together, flatten it down, and you're going to start to find that after just a few wraps here, it's becoming much easier to handle, and the wires aren't moving around as much. And just the important thing here is to make sure that these wraps are flat next to each other, so they're not overlapping each other there, and also that the base wires are staying flat next to each other. So once you wrap that space between the two loops, and you can't get any further because then obviously the loops are in the way to wrap all of them this way, then just going to do one side at a time, and we then need to basically get a 0.4mm wire here to the other side of the loop, and this is coming down behind, and what we're going to do is only wrap around some of them. So I'm going to wrap around the two straight ones that are on one side of the loop. So the wire that's the loop itself, and the one below it in this case here, I'm not going to wrap now. So I'm just going to wrap around these two by themselves, but same principle otherwise. Again, use your pliers whenever you need to tighten anything. Push things close together. So basically we need to wrap these two wires together until we get to the other side of the loop. And of course you want to just do the same on the other side with the other length of the 0.4mm, just those top two wires there to get to the other side of the loop. Now you can see we have those wrapped. Then we just got to go back to wrapping all of them together again. So just start one side at a time, make sure they're all nice and flat and those loops are sticking out. And we just go behind all of them and go back to wrapping all of them together. just like we did in that midsection. And then we just want to do this for a little bit, and of course the same on the other side as well. So now I've done both sides here, and then this is what it looks like. You just want to make sure to wrap the same amounts there, so the wire basically ends up in the same place on either side, because obviously we want it to be even. So if you imagine, this is going to be the lower part of the cabochon. So obviously we also need to start shaping this, but the point that I got to now is we also need to start adding some more design into it, and also parts that's going to capture. So if we look back on our sketch, then we can see, again, obviously keep referring to that, the two loops line up there, and we reach the point where we want to start adding these loops over the top of the cabochon like we did on the first one down here. That's going to help capture from this side. So obviously we can bring in the cabochon, which what I recommend doing anyway. Now I just want to start putting a slight curve into this as well. So just lay this piece of wire that we just made here against the cabochon, so the bottom side, and just kind of shape it gently against, just adding that curve into it. Just so we can confirm that this is where we want those loops that are going to go over the top to start. So just something a bit like this, and then we need to start making those loops in the same way that we did with the first one. So just leave the length of 0.4mm wire out of the way for now, and then we want to pick out the very top of the base wires there. Make sure the wraps are as well pushed as far down as they'll go, and then picking out that top wire and bringing it up and over the top of itself to get that loop started. And now remember, I have the three next to each other, and the first one is a small one, so just keep bringing it down in size until you're happy with it. And of course have the length here go back out the same way where it came from. So I think something a little bit like that. It's a nice size. Maybe just tighten it a little bit more. And then go on and make the next one. So the middle loop, again, just get the wire over the top of itself. And then this one is going to be larger. Bring the wire back out in the same direction. And then again, just judge how you want it to look. It's completely up to you. And then of course, that last one is again a small one. And try and get that the same as the first one as much as possible. Smooth it out, and then we can just look at it and adjust it. I need to open it back up a little bit. And we have something. Again, also just always use your pliers whenever you need to. And then bring it out and then just have a look. And that doesn't look too bad. So we have our three loops here. Now of course, before moving on, go to the other side, pick out that very top wire, and basically do the exact same thing on this side. So small one, large loop, and then the small one again. Now we have all the loops in place here and we're happy with how they're sitting. Then it's time to continue to wrap more, because we need to connect these loops as well together, just like we did in that first one. So just grab the 0.4mm wire again and start wrapping around the wires. Now here it's the point where just need to see where we are. Just flatten them out. And I've got to a point where I'm reaching that very first loop. So what I need to do is wrap below it first of all. So just around the bottom 3 wires, not that top wire where the loop is. So like this. Making sure the base wires here are flat next to each other. And basically we need to wrap until we get to the other side of the loop. Just going to use my chain nose pliers to help flatten everything out. And push my wraps nice and close together. And then just check where we are. Now I think just 1 or 2 more wraps. And then we'll be on the other side of the loop, where we can then start to incorporate the top wire again, because we're then going to be wrapping the 4 wires together, and then that's in between that first and second loop. And just do that a few times until you reach that next loop, and that kind of stops you. Then wrap below that again, and then after the loop wrap all the wires together in between them, and then again wrap below the last loop. So just like we did in the very first cabochon, where we had these loops as well. So now all the wires on both sides here are connected, and I've wrapped after the very last loop on both sides, and in my case here I've made sure to do 4 wraps. So just make sure to do the same amount of wraps on both sides so it finishes nice and even. Now what I'm going to do is actually finish off the excess of this weaving wire, because we are done using it now. And for that I'm just going to use some flush cutters here. So I've got my piece, and I want to make sure that the wire here finishes on the inside. So obviously I've already started the shape a little bit. The cabochon is going to sit like this, so I want to make sure that the weaving wire finishes on this inside part of all these base wires, because that way it's going to be out of the way and stuck between the wires and the cabochon, so it's not going to be able to catch or scratch on anything. So just make sure you've done your last wrap and you're happy with how everything is sitting. Then I take my flush cutters, and then on the inside here what I do is go in and cut off the excess, but just about in the middle as it's going across. So there is an end there sticking out on the back, and I'm then going to push that down nice and flat, and then the end of the wire is just finished nicely there on the back. And of course just do the same thing on the other side as well. So now we have those out of the way, so they're not gonna be bothering us anymore. Then I want to just bring the cabochon back in, because I want to just continue shaping my wires here around the cabochon, and the best way to do that is simply just using the cabochon itself, because obviously that way it's kind of almost as a template for what you need, because you need it to follow the shape of the cabochon. So I'm just going to make sure it lays in the middle here, hold on to everything, and then just keep shaping the side wires here, so all of them at the same time around the side of the cabochon. So just further around, hugging the cabochon as much as possible, and you can see those little loops there are over the top of the cabochon, so hugging it from the front and capturing it nicely, but at the same time adding some decoration. So that's one side. Make sure the loop's there in the middle, and then go to the other side and do the same thing. So we're now just bringing it into shape more of the actual cabochon itself, bringing all these wires up towards the top, shaping around the cabochon here. So something a little bit like this, and you can see obviously any adjustments you want to make, just do that. until you're happy with how this is shaped around the cabochon. Then it's time to deal with these wires on the top. So just picked up the wires and the cabochon, and then now, because we do have those loops at the front, that does help keep it in place more. Obviously the back is still open as well, but I'm just going to kind of hold it in place here best I can. And then I want to start shaping these wires. Now I have them all laying flat next to each other. So I'm just going to grab hold of them and start where they're coming out from, the very final wraps there. Just start putting a bit more of a curve into them, kind of bringing them a little bit in over the front of the cabochon. So slowly you can see something like that. And then you can kind of just swap position whenever you need to. Just focus on one at a time and kind of bring them in over a little bit more and separate them out a little bit. So the very first one will be coming in over the furthest. Kind of the same principle again as on the first cabochon we did, but obviously that was after we secured it in place. In this case, everything is still open and loose, but just separate out the wires a bit basically, making sure some of them come a bit in over the edge of the cabochon. And then put it back in place, and then bring them further around. Now I want them to basically reach towards just a bit before the middle of the cabochon, because then I'm going to start again, grab all of them and start bringing them around to go down behind the back of the cabochon, trying to make sure that they stay slightly, some of them there in front of the cabochon. So just take your time, bring them down towards the back. Now you can also then, if you feel like it's a little bit too fiddly and you have some things in place, just take the cabochon out, and then that will help get a better grip sometimes. Just smooth out the wires here for them to be coming downwards, but they're still laying flat next to each other, as you can see. And just putting the cabochon back in. So something a little bit like that. Now obviously that's just one side. Just push it flat against the cabochon. Can always adjust it more, so nothing's final yet. As you can see, sometimes these wires here that we brought in over the front a little bit, they might kind of sneak back because we're kind of pulling at the wires. So just put your nails in between them and just kind of pull them down gently again, bringing them a bit further in again over the cabochon and separating them out there. But then I'm gonna kind of swap this around to more or less just do the same thing on the other side here. So try and hold everything in place, and then start to bring the wires a little bit in over the cabochon, putting a bit more of curve into them, you could say. And then before you quite reached the middle there, start bringing them towards the back, but continue to have them flat next to each other. Now don't forget, we just want to separate them out a little bit from each other, and also bring them in over the front of the cabochon to make sure of that, to obviously get the two sides to look as similar as possible as well. And then otherwise do the same thing of keeping hold of them and then bringing them around the back of the cabochon and have them come more or less straight down to sit next to the other ones. So we kind of achieve a little something like that. Obviously, just want to adjust it a little bit. Again, smooth out your wires if you need to. And then now you just want to take your time to have a look at anything, see how it looks and sits. Of course, I just need to pull these, like I did on the other side, forward a little bit again. Because they kind of snuck back a little bit as we pull the wires. So just do any adjustments here until you feel it looks pretty symmetrical, and obviously we have all the wires then coming down on the back, ending up next to each other. Something a little bit like this, all flat next to each other. Now before we then start securing anything here on the back, what we just need to do is one final thing, because as you can see right now, we don't have any way of attaching a chain or anything. So we need to just make sure to add some loops at the top. So again, I get my trusty 6-step making pliers, using that same step to get some nice consistent loops. Then basically I just want to first of all decide where I want them. I'm going to make a loop kind of on either side of the cabochon, and I'm going to use the very outer wire on either side. So that's these two here. So just going to do one side at a time, decide where I want the loop to sit, and then place my pliers on the wire in that place. And then I just want to separate that wire out, start bringing it all the way around the pliers. All the way to make a full circle there. Something like that. And then we just want to bring this wire basically back in, more or less into the position it was. So just bring it back into that shape and back down to again join up with the other ones and be the outer wire. As you can see, we just added that loop in, but the wire is then back in its position. Of course, you just want to do the same thing with the loop on the other side, make it as symmetrical as possible. So place your pliers, create your loop, and then bring the wire back in with the other ones. So we prepared our loops here, so we can obviously attach whatever chain we want to, and this is more or less how the cabochon is going to sit and be captured. Now obviously all that's left to do is secure the back here. So just make sure everything is sitting how you want it to. And what we need to do in order to do that is cut another length of a 0.4mm. And I have a length of about 50 centimeters here. Now that's just what I'm using. Obviously if you're using different materials, then yours might be different. So I'm going to grab my piece here and I'm just going to remove my cabochon, just because there's no point in fiddling around too much if we don't need to. And basically the aim is to attach all these together. So first of all, just make sure that they're nice and straight, so straight enough that when you lay them next to each other here, it looks nice. And then I'm going to grab my 0.4mm wire and I'm going to place that in behind all these base wires. So just kind of slide it in between there and just leave a little tail so you have that to hold on to. Now we kind of just need to separate out our wires a little bit, because I want to start wrapping just the two very middle wires. So what we can do is just separate them out just a little bit. So at the very bottom here, kind of just turn some of the others out of the way, so they're a little bit easier to access. So something a bit like that. You can see I have them here in the middle. They also happen to be the shorter ones, because they are the ones that we use to make those loops with. So again, just slide my weaving wire in underneath them, and then I'm going to come up underneath the bottom of the two, and I just want to get my wire up a little bit, not all the way up and like pull them really tight to each other, but just where they kind of start meeting each other. And then it's the same principle as we've done in other places. We just want to start wrapping these two together, laying flat next to each other. Now obviously it's a little bit more fiddly because we have this framework behind it, but just do the best you can, and whenever you need to, use your pliers to help flatten out those base wires so they stay flat next to each other. So I'm going to wrap around these two by themselves to start connecting them, and also making sure my wraps are close together. And it's up to you really how much you want to do this. I'm going to do about 5 wraps or so. Obviously it also depends on the materials that you're using and just how you want it to look. So now I have my 5 first wraps there around the 2 middle wires. Then I have my weaving wire coming down behind all the wires. I didn't bring it up underneath in between these wires here to wrap around again, because now what I'm going to do is bring in the next set of wires. So that just means the next one out on both sides, so you can just kind of bring them back into it, straighten them back out, so we can kind of focus on the wires that we're working with. Something a bit like that. Then I'm going to bring it up underneath that one to come up between the 2 wires here, and then go over the top of now these 4 wires, but still making sure that my wraps are laying flat next to the previous ones, and then come down behind them again, and again use your flat nose or chain nose to help you along, making sure everything gets nice and flat and even. And same principle here. I'm just going to do, in my case, it's the same amount of wraps to get it fairly symmetrical. And once I wrap them, I'm just going to bring the next wires into it. You can kind of see a pattern here. We're just gradually bringing a wire on each side into the process, and then wrap over the top of all of them, making sure everything is nice and flat next to each other. Flattening everything down here, and then do the same amount of wraps here. And of course we're getting to the point where we just have one left on either side that we haven't brought in. Now of course they also just get brought in the same way, so bring them into sit next to everything else, and then just make sure everything stays flat here, and then wrap over the top of all of them. And then obviously, since this is the middle one, the wraps that we're doing, you can either do the same amount of wraps or you could do a different amount of wraps. And it kind of depends as well on your piece, because we also need to think about the space that we had left below where the wraps are, because we need to decrease again, but we still also then need to have some space below here where we wrapped for finishing off the base wires as well. So I just made my 5 wraps there, and like I said, we now need to start stepping down again, because you can see we kind of stepped up here. So that means we just do all the same things but in reverse. So that means instead of bringing the 2 outer ones into the piece, I'm going to separate them back out. So just kind of pull them out and away a little bit here. Now you can do it a bit more all the way from where they're coming out from the wraps. And something a little bit like that. Because then what I'm going to do is go back to just wrapping around the remaining wires in here. So we separated those out. We just caught them basically when we did that previous wrap that we just did. Then just go around these wires again. And again, I just like doing it the same amount of times. to make it as consistent and symmetrical as possible. And then of course, same principle, we just continue in the same way, separating out one wire on either side. So just push them more out of the way so we can just focus on the other ones. And then just go in and just wrap those and basically continue like this until we're back down to only having wrapped around the two very middle ones, which are also those shorter ones. So this is how it's looking now that I reached down to those two middle wires and I wrapped them as well. And you can see also separating out all those other wires along the way, it's also kind of getting them into the position where we're actually going to finish them off. So just kind of separate them out fairly evenly like that. Now because we are now done using this 0.4mm wire, I'm going to get rid of the excess. So I'm just going to flip it around it because again I want to finish this on the inside, because if you imagine obviously the cabochon is going to sit inside of there. So it's actually going to be between the back of the cabochon and where these wraps are. So I'm just going to do the top one and the bottom one. Cut off the excess and then just flatten down the end, and of course the same with the bottom one. Just get your pliers in there. And then we've got rid of our 0.4mm wire here as well. And we don't need to worry about the ends again catching or scratching on anything, because they're nicely hidden away. So we now have our frame done here, and all that's left is to finish off these ends really of our 0.8mm lengths of wire. But obviously in doing that we're also going to connect this back part to the frame, so obviously it becomes kind of locked in place. But before I completely do that and before I add in my cabochon, I'm going to finish off and cut down these lengths. So what I'm going to be doing is basically making little loops. If you look at the first one we did, I'm actually going to be doing the same principle of ending the wire with a little loop there. So again, you can also do something different, obviously it's completely up to you, but I'm going to cut off the excess so I'm left with a short length. Again, rather cut off too little, because you can always cut off more. And then about the same on the other side. So I think that's about there. And then go further down. So just cut off so we get these lengths shorter. So once you cut them down, what I'm then going to do is grab my 6-step bell making pliers again. You can also use round nose pliers, it's up to you. And I'm going to start going in and creating those loops on the ends. So again, I'm just using the smallest step, getting right at the end, and then start to bring them inwards. All the way until the end meets up with itself. Just flatten that out. So it can sit a little something like that. Now obviously it's up to you how you want this to look and sit. So if you want it to be closer in, then you can go in and cut off a bit more of the very tip and then roll it some more. But otherwise, go to the other side, do the loop on that side, because obviously want to get them as symmetrical as possible. So just flatten that down and have a look and see if it looks about right. Bring that up so they sit evenly. That does actually look pretty alright. So it looks like I don't need to go in and cut anything off of there. But you just want to go around all of the ends here and adding in these loops, and I just prefer doing them in the same direction if you kind of have a line down the center. So on this side here, I'm bringing all the loops in the same direction, so kind of upwards and inwards, and then the same on the other side, upwards and inwards. And then just adjust them until you're happy with how it all looks. And then mine's ended up looking something like this, but like I said, you can really have this look however you want to. You can also have them come further out and create kind of a different shape. Now, what we need to do is, before we attach anything here, we obviously need to add the cabochon. So I just want to check, see, I think I want it to sit like this. So these loops kind of cover this part of the cabochon. So I'm just going to slip it in from the back here, slides right into place, and then all that's left to do is attach some of these loops to the bottom part of the frame here. Now what you can also do is, before doing this, adding the cabochon, you could also attach some of these loops together if you want to, if you feel like it's needed, but I personally don't feel it's really necessary for the security, because this will be enough to hold it. So what I'm going to do is this loop here, so the kind of one in the corner, you could say, or the ones next to the two in the middle, are the ones that are the closest to where, first of all, the loops are in the frame, but where those loops are in the frame, we have a little bit of gap, because if you remember, we wrapped on the other side of the loop and then left a bit of bare wire on one of the single base wire on the other side of the loop. So there's a little bit of a gap there. So I'm going to choose these specific loops to be the ones that I connect to the frame. So I'm just going to take a length of 0.4 mil here, just a short length. It doesn't have to be anything very long, because it's not a whole lot we're going to be using, maybe about 20 to 30 centimeters or so. Obviously it depends as well. But then what we need to do first of all is attach this to the loop. So I'm just going to go around here a few times. Now it can be a little bit fiddly, because obviously we have less space to work with because the cabochon is in place as well. But just do your best. And just wrapping it around first of all to attach it, and then we need to wrap it a few times before we do anything else. So never just a single wrap, we want to do it a few times. Now what I find can help quite often is, just get my chain nose, is actually creating a little bit of a hook on the end of the wire, because you can then feed it in and it'll come right back out the other side of the wire. I find that very often helps, as opposed to having just a straight end. Oops, just got caught up there. Just got caught up again. But like I said, just wrap around here a couple of times so this wire is attached. And once you have it attached, I'm going to take the other end, and then it's attached to the loop now. Then I'm going to go down to the gap I have in the frame and then feed my wire through it. Just get it in position there. You can see it come through at the back there. It's starting to come out. Now it's only a little bit of it showing, so I'm gonna just take my chain nose and grab it with that. It's a little bit easier instead of fiddling around trying to use my fingers, and then pull it all the way tight. So basically that attaches the loop to the frame. Now if you can just test this here. If you can get your wire through that gap again, I do recommend doing this more than once, but it might be a little bit tight in the framework. So if you can, just test it first. Let's see if I can get my wire through. It doesn't appear like I can, so I might just have to accept just doing it the once here. But if you can, like I said, try and repeat this step at least another time. But then I'm going to go back to the loop here. To again make sure it kind of gets reinforced. And then just wrap around the wire in the loop a couple of times like we did when we attached it. Because we need to make sure we have a few wraps just around a single base wire before we can finish off the weaving wire. So we can see we have the attachment there, looking something like that. So like I said, just kind of work with what you have and what your possibilities are and how yours has ended up. And of course we need to then get rid of the excess here. Just see what direction. My wire that I've just used is coming around from the back, and if I was going to do another wrap I needed to go down through, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna bring it around as if I was gonna do another wrap, and then I'm gonna cut off the excess but leaving a short little tail, because what I then do is take my chain nose and then push it in and basically make it continue that wrap, so the very end actually gets on the inside of the wire, more against the cabochon. So like that, and of course there's the other end as well. And let's see what direction that's coming in. Cut off the excess and then just push it and tuck it away to make sure that absolutely nothing sticks out, so it can catch and scratch on any clothes or skin. So that's how you attach. Now of course, if you have enough left in the length that you cut off, you can just use that for the loop on the other side, but that is the same principle. Attach your wire to the loop first, then do the connection if you can more than once, and then come up and finish the wire off on the loop. And then once you've done that, your cabochon should be in there nicely and securely. So this is what it looks like on the back. It's fully attached and the cabochon is in there nice and securely. It's not coming out whatsoever. And then this is what it looks like on the front. You can see a really nice effect. So all that's left to do now, because we've made both of them, is to attach them together. So these loops here are closed loops if you remember when we made them. But these loops are actually open, so I'm not going to be using jump rings to attach them together. I'm actually just going to use the loops themselves. So you just want to open these up. And then get, obviously, the other cabochon. Put it into place. Connect them together here. And then close the loops back up here. And make sure to do it nice and securely so there's no gap. Just like you would do if it was a jump ring, obviously. Nice and secure. So they can't just detach from each other. And then they are now attached. And it has a nice movement to it as well. Nice angle, even though it's not jump rings used or anything. It's still loops attached together though. Then all that's left to do, obviously, is attach your chain as well. That I'm just going to be doing by using a jump ring. So I'm going to open that up. And I've already cut my chain ready. I then use 2 separate lengths of chain, but they're the same length. So I have one length and then I have the other length, because obviously we have 2 loops in this cabochon. So it's not just one length of chain. So put the jump ring through the loop in the cabochon. That's obviously the top cabochon. And if I can just get the chain through it as well. So add the chain, close the jump ring back up, make sure that's going to be nice and secure as well. Something like that. Of course, do the other side as well. And on the other end of the chain, I'm just going to add my clasp. And then once you've done this, you have your finished pendant with 2 cabochons ready to wear. So this was a bit of a long one, but I really wanted to make sure that I went through all the details and also showed you the process of how I make some of my pieces. And this one, in the case, all the way from when I did the original sketch. Because I don't always sketch out my pieces before I make them, but sometimes I find it really useful and basically having that as a template while I'm then making my piece. And don't forget, if you make this piece or anything from any of my other tutorials, I would love to see them if you want to share them with me. So you can always tag me on social media. You'll find links to the ones that I'm on in the description box down below. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.